The first thing Jonathan Hale noticed was the way the room bent toward him, as if the chandeliers and linen-covered tables leaned in to listen whenever he breathed, a quiet gravity earned by money and reputation rather than kindness. He sat in a high-rise restaurant in Chicago, glass walls, opening to a city that glittered like a promise kept for some and denied to many, and he felt untouchable. Then he noticed the waitress, Rebecca Moore, standing a little too straight, her hands folded with the careful restraint of someone who had learned to survive by being invisible. What if this were you, standing there after a double shift, hoping not to be seen, hoping to make rent and keep dignity intact, while power stared back at you across polished silverware? Jonathan was known across the United States as a ruthless billionaire who built an empire from logistics and private equity, celebrated for bold decisions, and whispered about for the wreckage left behind. He wore confidence like a tailored jacket, smooth and expensive, and he had learned that words could be weapons sharpened by languages others did not understand. As the night deepened and wine loosened his edges, he leaned toward his business associate and spoke in German, letting the syllables cut clean and private, mocking the waitress's posture, her accent when she spoke English, the way she apologized too often. He assumed privacy, the old assumption that money buys silence, that service workers are furniture. If you were in his place, with no one to challenge you, would you notice the harm or feel nothing at all? Rebecca had grown up far from the skyline, in a small town in Pennsylvania where her father, Thomas, worked nights at a steel plant until it closed, and her mother, Ruth, cleaned churches on weekends. Faith had been the thread that held their family together when jobs disappeared and hope thinned. And it was faith that carried Rebecca through a scholarship to a state university, then through loss when her mother died suddenly. Student loans followed her like shadows, and when her father fell ill, Rebecca left graduate school and took the first job she could, waiting tables under lights that never quite warmed. The uniform felt like a costume she could not remove, and the smile was a prayer repeated until it hurt. She understood every word Jonathan spoke. Years earlier, she had studied German obsessively, drawn to the precision of a language that did not hide meaning. She had lived briefly in Munich during an exchange program, working mornings in a bakery and evenings translating sermons for an American church abroad. That life felt like another person now, buried beneath trays and tips, but the language remained, clear and alive in her mind. As Jonathan's words landed, something shifted inside her, not anger alone but a deep tiredness, the kind that comes from being reduced to less than human too many times. What would you do in that moment, when silence feels like survival but truth feels like rescue? Rebecca did not raise her voice or harden her face. She continued serving, her movement steady, but when Jonathan finished, she responded in fluent German, explaining calmly that she understood him, that she knew exactly how he saw her, and that his assumptions revealed more about his character than her worth. She spoke of dignity, of work done with honesty, of the unseen lives that support the comfort of men like him. The table froze, the city beyond the glass seeming to pause. Jonathan's smile collapsed, replaced by a flicker of something he had not felt in years, exposure. In that instant, power shifted, not through volume but through truth spoken without cruelty. The restaurant manager approached, alarmed by the tension, but Rebecca continued, still composed, explaining in English now, for all to understand, that she would finish her shift with professionalism but would not accept humiliation. She did not ask for pity or applause. She simply named what had happened. Other diners watched, some with embarrassment, some with quiet respect. Jonathan felt heat rise in his chest, not the familiar burn of anger but a colder sensation, a mirror held too close. He saw his mother, Hannah, a church secretary who once worked 3 jobs to keep him fed after his father left, and the memory cut deeper than any insult. Jonathan tried to recover, offering money, then apologies shaped like transactions, but Rebecca declined them gently. She finished her work, collected her coat, and left into the night where the wind off Lake Michigan carried the smell of winter and possibility. She cried once she reached the bus stop, not from weakness but release, the tears of someone who finally chose themselves. She wondered if she would be fired, how she would explain this to her father, whether courage could afford groceries. Yet beneath the fear was a steady warmth, the knowledge that she had not betrayed who she was. The story did not end at the restaurant. A fellow diner shared what happened, not as spectacle but as testimony, and by morning the account traveled through social media and local news. Rebecca's name surfaced alongside a conversation about respect and labor, about the quiet intelligence behind service roles. A community fundraiser appeared, modest at first, then swelling as messages poured in from strangers who had felt unseen. Churches reached out, offering support and prayers. A small publishing house contacted her about translating faith-based materials, a door opening where she thought none existed. Jonathan retreated from the noise, unsettled. He canceled meetings, walked alone along the river, and confronted the gap between the boy he had been and the man he had become. He sought counsel from his pastor, Andrew, who reminded him that repentance was not a performance but a turning. Jonathan wrote a letter to Rebecca, not sent through lawyers, acknowledging harm without defense, committing to changes in how his companies treated service workers, not as charity but justice. He began funding language programs and debt relief initiatives quietly, without press releases, learning to do good without needing to be seen. Months later, Rebecca stood in a modest office, translating texts that carried hope across borders. Her father's health stabilized, her nights finally quiet. She did not measure her life by what happened to Jonathan, but by what awakened in herself. She understood now that power does not always roar. Sometimes it speaks clearly and refuses to bow. If you were watching this unfold, would you believe that one moment of courage could ripple so far, or would you still doubt the weight of your own voice? Before the final credits roll in your heart, take a moment and tell us in the comments how this story made you feel, or whether you have ever faced a moment where silence and truth stood before you. If this story truly touched your heart, gently consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing, so more stories of kindness, regret, hope, and second chances can find their way to those who need them most.